Okay, we're continuing with quotes in alphabetical order. This is Francine Prose, which I think is a great name for a writer. She's an American novelist. She majored in English literature in college. So the advantage of majoring in English literature is you will have read the English literature, okay? So you should know it pretty well. But there's a downside to it. You know, most people who major in English literature are kind of boring. So they're going to have to bring something to it to make themselves more interesting. Because, you know, somebody who's had an exciting life, you know, Ernest Hemingway, for example, a lot of adventures. He's got a lot to write about. Somebody who sat around reading all the time, unless they did something else to bring to it, they need to make themselves more interesting. She said, if I could control my life, I would spend most of my time writing. That's how I feel. I wish somebody would sponsor me, because right now I got to work, I got to pay bills, so I could just do research, because I could figure out tons of stuff in medicine if I had more time. That last book I wrote, you know, Prevent and Reverse Parkinson's Disease and Chronic Fatigue Syndrome. It's a 500-page book of biochemistry, and I wrote that in 1 month. Okay, if I had more, and that's working full time. If I had more time, I could do so much more, but I just don't. I'm swamped with work. Okay, what else? She said, like most writers, maybe all of them, I learned to write from writing and by examples from reading books. You aim for what you want, and if you don't get it, you don't get it. But if you don't aim, then you don't get anything. Yep. So I think what makes you want to write is that you feel you have something to say. To want to write a novel, you have a good story, often autobiographical, and you shape it a little bit and put it into your book. She did mention if you're trying to write a novel, you have to have it fixed and have this emotional drive to do it. Otherwise, it'll be hard to finish it. Versus a nonfiction book, as long as you know what you're talking about, you can just crank it out no matter what. With a novel, you should know exactly what the ending's going to be, so everything kind of tends to it, as we talked about. Edgar Allan Poe said that. You know, a lot of good writers, all the good writers know that. Leon Uris knows that. Margaret Mitchell, who wrote Gone with the Wind, magnificent book. Okay, she says, language is the medium we use much in the same way a composer uses notes, the way a composer uses colors. Words are the raw material out of which literature is crafted. When we humans speak, we are not merely communicating, this is a good one, we are not merely communicating information, but we are attempting to make an impression and to achieve a goal. I think that's a good point, is that good writing is not just saying things clearly. You know, a robot or artificial intelligence can say things clearly. Real good communicator, they say things clear and emotionally. You know, so it's, you know, even with scientific writing, there should be some emotion, there should be a story. You know, why is it important? Why is this worth knowing? How can this help you? And then she says, poets are much more dramatic, more theatrical than fiction writers. Yeah, pretty much true. A lot of the best fiction writers are actually, they kind of don't jump out that much. You know, Victor Hugo, the story builds over time. Michael Crichton, the story builds over time. The big word they're looking for right there is verisimilitude, being able to stay in a realistic scene like you're watching a movie, as the way the book is written. You feel like you're turning the pages fast, like Da Vinci Code. She says, I know a lot of Eastern Europeans, and because of what they've been through and what they've seen, they have an attitude where they are not as easily fooled. Yeah, that's my experience, that Eastern Europeans have a better sense of the BS going on in the world than people from most other places. Okay. In general, men tend to have a better sense of what's going on than women. Women kind of live in a little bit of a protected world by their men. Just a fact, okay? They always deny. Women always deny anything that doesn't put them on top. But the reality is we like them a lot more than they like us, and we kind of protect them and provide for them, even though they don't appreciate as much as they should. Okay, next line. You can assume that if a writer's work has survived for centuries, there are reasons why this is so. Explanations that have nothing to do with a conspiracy of academics plotting to resuscitate a zombie army of dead white males. Yeah, it's just a fact. Dead white males have produced most of the best literature and scientific work ever done on the planet. And all this multiculturalism is BS. The airplane, the radio, the telegraph, the TV, the telephone, the record player. Okay, it didn't come from all over the place. It came from Christian scientists, and then later on as well from Jewish male scientists, and hardly anything was done by women before about 1970 or 1980. And not much done by other places. A little bit here and there, but not that much. Study it. Don't take my opinion. Study it yourself. You will see. Put a quote in the down below and tell me if I'm wrong about something. I'm happy to learn. Marcel Proust, 1871 to 1922. He was a French novelist, homosexual. He would go to male brothels, okay? And he was an atheist. And the reason I tell you that is a lot of these writers in the early 1900s, they're kind of degenerates, all right? Like people tell you, James Joyce was a great writer. No. Did you ever read Ulysses? I thought it stunk, okay? James Joyce would get drunk and get into fights. What I'm trying to say is, if some guy says he's an atheist, okay, and I don't think Joyce was too religious either, what he's saying is that life is meaningless. To me, a writer is somebody who says life is meaning and they show me how to overcome obstacles to have a successful life. Somebody who says life is meaningless, we're just a bunch of farm animals, we're a bunch of talking monkeys. What does that say to that? If the guy has decided that life is meaningless, then his writing is going to be largely meaningless. So what I'm trying to say is, the public schools glorified all these weird, screwed up people from the early 1900s. Fitzgerald, was also another alcoholic. That other crazy lady, Virginia Woolf, she's always trying to commit suicide. Same with Sylvia Plath. I'm sorry, but they have like almost nothing to say to me. I want men who had a challenge and they figured out how to overcome it and then they teach you. That's valuable, okay? They have a good story to tell you. That's valuable. Okay, so a guy who says life is meaningless and he wants to go to male brothels and have sex with random men, okay, I doubt that he's going to have much to say to me. Let's see, he does have some quotes here. I'll just give him a chance. He says, all the great things we know have come to us from neurotics. It is they and only they who have founded religions and created great works of art. Well, I wouldn't use the word neurotic, but I would say, yeah, anybody who's going to be the best in the world at something, they're going to be a maniac, over the top, obsessed about it, and put a lot of time in it. They have to be. How else could they have become the best in the world? Because there's tons of talent everywhere, but greatness and genius is rare. And it takes an over-the-top effort or, also really unusual ability. Okay. Yeah, and there's glorifications of homosexuals and everything, in the modern world. Because the modern world hates heterosexuals, hates Christians, hates the traditional family. So, like, they glorify Leonardo da Vinci. He was like the worst of the Renaissance artists, okay? He could draw well. Okay, but he's nothing compared to Michelangelo. He's nothing compared to Raphael or Caravaggio. Name one good painting of Leonardo da Vinci. Everybody will say Last Supper. Last Supper is not that good of a painting. It's decent. It's not. It's Madonna of the Rocks. Come on. He doesn't have anything that you would actually want. And then they go the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa sucks. It looks like a big transvestite. Nobody wants that. Nobody really likes that. You're just told you're supposed to like it. Okay? It's BS. It's more this modern BS gaslighting. Okay? Get rid of all the Christians. And he was kind of anti-Christian too. Okay, but still, he does have a point, Marcel Proust, that it's going to be people who have just this maniac, over-the-top enthusiasm for something. They're going to create something new and special. Regular people don't create art. Normal person who just wants to be normal, they won't create any art. Because to be normal is to be conformist. You have to be beyond what regular people do in order to do something beyond what regular people do. Which usually means you're obsessed about something. You think something is really special for your own personal reasons. Okay, next quote. The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. Yeah, that's part of growing up. You see things differently, but that's still a reasonable statement. Happiness is beneficial for the body, but it is grief that develops the mind. There's some truth in that. When you go through a major ordeal, you've been knocked down into the gutter for a while, and you have to come back out of it, and you learn from that. Okay, so that's it for Marcel Proust. Okay. Yeah, and the other guy was, who wrote Madame Bovary. That was the stupidest freaking book. It was disgusting. It was a piece of crap. So like I'm trying to say, these modernist writers, they stink. The best writers were back in the 1800s of the novels. Fyodor Dostoevsky, Henry Sienkiewicz, Victor Hugo, Charles Dickens. Okay, those were masterpiece books. Masterpiece writers. All right, just a couple quick psychology quotes and we'll call it a day. This is Father Chad Ripperger. He's actually a pretty good priest speaker, Catholic guy. He says, rapid images on TV, if children watch this before 5 years of age, it'll cause brain damage because the brain's not wired for that. I actually think that's true. They're disgusting. They're terrible. Like, for babysitting a little bit, I got some old VHS tapes. My wife kind of wanted me to do that. She had to work. We had a babysitter, but they at least were kind of slow. I watched them myself first with the kids. But yeah, I don't really like electronic babysitters that much. And I would not let a kid watch TV or the DVDs either. Too many special effects. I think that cause brain damage. Like strobe lights, give the kid like a seizure, okay? Parents should not let their kids watch TV. Parents should homeschool their kids. Yep, that's all true. And then he points out psychologists don't know what they're doing. Their success rate is less than 10%. I think psychologists are basically priests of atheism. And I think they're actually, in general, very bad for people. Don't get me wrong, there are some psychologists who have done great research. But when you get past the BS and the smoke and mirrors, you ask them, what is the definition of a good person? They can't answer that. What is the definition of good art, a good book? They can't answer it. They have no moral foundation. And you've seen what a bunch of spineless weasels they are. Whenever some new thing comes along, what are your pronouns? Oh, they go, here's my pronouns, you know. They're happy. They do whatever they're told to do. They don't have any individual thinking ability. They can't tell you what a good book is. They can't tell you what a good painting is. They can't even tell you the difference between a man and a woman. I mean, they're a joke. How can you go for relationship advice to a person who doesn't know the difference between a man and a woman? It's like, get out of here. They're a joke. Okay, and then lots of psychologists, what do? They do family counseling. And what do they always counsel? They counsel the woman to get a divorce, okay, and tell her how she can, rip off her husband for more money. I never in my life met a single person who heard of or anybody going to marriage counseling and it helped their marriage. All I've ever heard of is divorces and the marriage counselor helping the wife to get full custody, take the kids away from the man, okay, which is bad for the children. Women are good parents up until the kid hits puberty, but after puberty, fathers are much more important than mothers. Okay, kids need, an introduction to reality, objectivity, which a father provides. Mommy gives them unconditional love, and they need that, but then they tend to get that, but they don't tend to get the objectivity of a father. It just tells them, this is how it is, do what you're supposed to do. Stop being so lazy. Okay, Ripperger continues, psychologists have no definition of good mental health. Modern psychology was founded by atheists and agnostics. That is true. Okay. Freud, for example, would mock religion, mock anybody that was Christian. Okay, he had complete disgust for it. Okay, they're not helping you. The book Psychological Seduction was good, and it kind of goes through these points as well. Okay, Freud even called his patient goldfish, that he would hook them on a fish line, and then he said, once you've got them, you can just keep making money off them with all the repeat visits. Okay, Freud was a terrible doctor. He was terrible. Read his books. Read all about him. Read Thomas Schaus. Thomas Schaus writes all about Freud and how he was malicious towards his patients. Okay. One thing I thought was funny, if a woman was frigid, wouldn't have sex with her husband, he would give her electric shocks. So I thought that was kind of funny. Okay, so, that's Freud turning his back to the patient. Okay, it's so ridiculous. And then tries to get the kid to hate his parents, to hate his family, hate everything about him. If you tell some poor young person to hate everybody, it's not gonna improve their relationships with their family. Okay, it's crazy. Psychoanalysis. Krauss had a quote about that. It's the disease it pretends to cure. The patients do worse with that. Okay, what replaced psychoanalysis was all the money you could make off drugs and psychiatry. That's what got rid of it. Not because people paid that much attention to the truth about things. Okay, here's a quote from Peter Breggin, the great psychiatrist from Harvard. He said, ADHD was invented as a way to describe disruptive classroom behavior as a disease. There is no known biologic basis for psychiatric disease. All of the drugs that impact the mind, they work by partially disabling the brain and the mind. So what he basically said was, all psychiatric drugs cause brain damage. There's no exceptions. That's true. He says, for people who have depression, children, and you give them an antidepressant, you double the risk of suicide compared to giving them a sugar pill. Yeah. The only reason anybody gives all those pills is because you make money doing it. If it wasn't for all the money, you wouldn't do that. Okay. How did everybody survive before all these drugs? Okay. He says, depression is understandable human despair, and it frequently is responsive to psychosocial help. Children with disruptive classroom behavior are routinely placed on stimulants like Ritalin. Stimulant medications like Ritalin have lots of side effects, and the patient often ends up on multiple psychiatric medications by the age of 10 years old. Breggin, he says he usually takes all his pediatric patients off all psychiatric medicines. Thomas Schaus, the other great famous psychiatrist, he said, giving psychiatric medicines to children is not therapy, it's poisoning them. Yeah, and why do they do it? Because they make money off it, okay? And the Harvard psychiatrists who recommended all this stuff, they sold out to patients. That's how they get money from Big Pharma. It's a disgrace. It's disgusting. It's evil. The average person is so stupid, they believe whatever they're told. But, the modern age is one of the most evil ages that there's ever been towards children. We take their mothers away from them, send them to work so they don't get breastfed, lowering their IQs. The baby formulas are full of toxic chemicals, okay? We send them to school, teach them to hate their parents, hate their religion. We drug the crap out of them with these brain damage, lobotomy-causing drugs. It's awful, okay? We castrate them and we call it gender affirming. It's insane how we treat children in the modern world. We encourage mothers to bump off their babies, and they do it in the millions, okay? Motherly love, like I was lucky enough to have, has now become mother bump off child. Okay, let's see. Robert Mendelsohn, modern medicine is a religion. Just ask why enough times and sooner or later you reach a chasm of faith. Here's a guy who's really good. I've done his quotes before, lots of them. Thomas Schaus. He says the Oedipus complex is a tool to debase other people. Basically to label you. I mean, what an insulting thing to say. You want to have sex with your mother. I mean, get the hell out of here, okay? Young guy doesn't even know what sex is, okay? Okay, just some random Jordan Peterson quote. Dostoevsky writes like a psychologist, Tolstoy like a sociologist. He's praising Dostoevsky because he's a psychologist, okay? But Dostoevsky was brilliant. Tolstoy was a jerk. He was an a-hole, okay? When you really study him, Ayn Rand hated him too. I've read all about him. He's a total jerk. Anyways, that's all I got for today. I hope you found that helpful or interesting.